The storm had already begun by the time the body arrived. Outside, wind pressed against the windows like a living thing, and rain lashed at the panes with a rhythm that seemed almost deliberate. Inside the morgue, everything was still, that sterile kind of stillness that only exists where life has long since left. The hum of the refrigeration units filled the silence, low and steady, like a mechanical heartbeat echoing through cold steel. Dr. Matthew Cole stood alone under the unforgiving fluorescent lights. 22 years as a medical examiner had taught him how to find calm in the presence of death. But that night, he would lose it completely. The man on the gurney was Ethan Ward, 32 years old, male, cause of death, blunt force trauma from a multi-car collision on Route 47. The paperwork was clean, the declaration official. The tag on his toe read, deceased, 8:47 p.m. Cole had handled thousands of cases like it. Death, in his world, was procedural. You filed the report, prepared the body, and began your work. Yet something in the air felt wrong, a heaviness he couldn't quite name. He began the standard pre-autopsy inspection. External bruising, lacerations, fractures. His gloved hands moved methodically, his breath visible in the chilled air. The instruments beside him, scalpel, forceps, bone saw, gleamed in the white light. He noted the rain outside had grown louder, drowning out the hum of machinery. For a moment, he thought he heard something, a sound too faint to name. He told himself it was the storm, and then the body moved. It started as a tremor in the right arm, so subtle he almost missed it. A twitch, reflexive, he thought. Postmortem spasms were common, just residual electrical impulses firing through muscle fibers. But then came another movement, stronger this time. The fingers curling slightly, the chest rising, just enough to shift the sheet that covered him. Cole froze. He leaned closer, listening. For a moment, there was nothing. Only the rain, the hum, the hollow emptiness of a place built for endings. And then, cutting through it all, came the sound that would haunt him forever. A gasp. Wet, desperate, unmistakably human. The scalpel slipped from his hand, clattering onto the metal table. Cole stumbled backward, his heart pounding in his throat. He watched in disbelief as Ethan Ward's chest rose again. Once, twice, a slow, shallow rhythm struggling against the impossible. He stared at the monitors. Blank. No pulse, no respiration, no sign of activity. But the body was breathing. For a long, suspended moment, Dr. Cole couldn't move. Every instinct told him this wasn't real. He'd seen residual nerve twitches, muscular contractions, but not this. Not breath, not life. The air seemed to thicken. The storm outside grew louder, as if the world itself was straining to listen. Cole reached for Ethan's wrist, his fingers trembling. Under the skin, cold, bloodless skin, he felt it. A pulse. Faint. Irregular. But there, his training kicked in, and he shouted for assistance, his voice echoing down the empty hallways. Yet even as footsteps thundered closer, he couldn't look away from the man on the table. The man who should not have been alive? The door burst open, light spilling into the room as staff rushed in. Questions flew in every direction, but Cole said nothing. He could only stare. "I've seen death in every form imaginable," he would later whisper. But that night, I wasn't sure what death even meant anymore. Just 24 hours earlier, Ethan Ward had been alive. Vibrant, strong, and utterly ordinary in the most beautiful way. He was a paramedic, the kind of man who ran toward danger when others ran away. A father to a 3-year-old girl named Lily. A husband who never forgot to call home, no matter how long the shift. That morning, he'd woken before dawn to lace up his running shoes, pounding the rain-slicked pavement of his quiet neighborhood as the sky bled from gray to gold. He was training for his next marathon, something he'd promised himself he'd complete before turning 33. After the run came breakfast. Coffee with his wife, Julia, who teased him for his obsession with the perfect pace. There was laughter, the kind that fills a house and makes it feel alive. By evening, the rain had returned, not gentle this time, but heavy, relentless. The kind that makes the roads shimmer with danger. Ethan had just finished a double shift. Exhausted, but determined to make it home, he climbed into his truck and called Julia. The recording of that call would later become a haunting relic. His voice was calm, steady, as he said, "I'll be home soon. Kiss Lily for me." Minutes later, it happened. A call came in to dispatch. Multi-vehicle collision. Highway 47. Among the responders who arrived was Ethan's own colleague, paramedic Tony Ruiz. "We didn't know it was him at first," Tony would later recall, his voice breaking. "The rain was so bad, we could barely see." They found Ethan's truck crumpled against a guardrail, metal folded in on itself like paper. His seatbelt had saved him from being thrown, but the impact had crushed his chest. No pulse, no breathing. His pupils fixed and dilated. For 30 long minutes, the emergency team worked in the rain. CPR, adrenaline injections, defibrillation. Again and again, they shocked his heart, waiting for a rhythm that never returned. The heart monitor stayed flat. The clock read 8:47 p.m. when the attending physician finally looked up and said the words that end every fight. Time of death, 2047. His body was covered, loaded into the ambulance, and taken to the county morgue. Paperwork was filed. A family was notified. Julia's cry, when told her husband was gone, echoed down the sterile corridor of the hospital, a sound that no one who heard it ever forgot. The narration slows, reflecting, "In medicine, death has rules. No heartbeat, no breathing, no brain activity. The body cools, cells shut down, organs fail. It's a line drawn firmly between what is living and what is not." But, as Dr. Cole would later reflect, in medicine, we draw lines to define life and death. But sometimes, those lines blur. Ethan's story on that rain-soaked night should have ended, yet something waited beyond the silence, something neither science nor faith had prepared them to face. The morgue was colder than usual that night. A generator hummed faintly in the corner, its rhythm keeping time with the rain that battered the windows above. Stainless steel tables reflected the harsh white glow of overhead lights. Every sound, the snap of gloves, the scratch of pen against paper, the faint click of metal instruments, echoed too loudly in the silence. Dr. Matthew Cole began the routine autopsy procedure just past midnight. He'd done it thousands of times before, and every step had become ritual. Identification confirmed, paperwork signed, tools laid out in perfect alignment. Scalpel, rib shears, forceps, scales. The body of Ethan Ward lay before him, pale beneath the sheet, a man frozen mid-story. Cole worked in silence, dictating notes for the recorder clipped to his coat. Male, 32 years old. External injuries consistent with vehicular trauma. Multiple contusions. No signs of defensive wounds. His voice was steady, detached, the practiced calm of a man who had long learned to keep emotions separate from duty. He examined the torso, tracing the bruising across Ethan's ribs, the faint line where the seatbelt had cut into flesh. The rain outside rose to a crescendo, rattling the panes. Cole barely noticed. His focus narrowed to the rhythm of his own movements. Precise, mechanical, professional. Death, after all, had no surprises left for him, until it did. Halfway through the external examination, Cole noticed something, a flicker, barely perceptible. The faintest tremor in Ethan's eyelid. He froze, eyes narrowing. It wasn't uncommon for recently deceased bodies to exhibit post-mortem spasms, residual twitches caused by fading electrical signals in the muscles. He told himself that's all it was. He returned to his notes. "A possible residual muscle movement observed," he murmured into the recorder. His hand trembled slightly as he continued the inspection. And then he heard it, soft, shallow, almost imagined. A sound, a breath. The pen dropped from his hand. He looked up. Ethan's chest had risen, just slightly. A faint, hesitant lift, like a wave trying to break the surface. Cole stepped closer. His breath caught somewhere between disbelief and dread. The chest fell again, then rose. "No," he whispered. "That's impossible." The air thickened, the hum of machinery fading into silence. Cole reached out, placing 2 fingers on the cold wrist. Nothing, no pulse. Yet, as he leaned closer, the sound came again, louder this time, wet and real, a gasp. The next seconds unfolded like a dream. Instruments clattered to the floor. A tray overturned. Cole stumbled backward, heart pounding. His voice cracked as he called out for help, the words barely leaving his throat. The other technicians, hearing the panic in his tone, rushed in, their faces mirroring his disbelief as they saw what he saw. Ethan Ward, the man who had been pronounced dead for over 5 hours, was breathing. "Check for a pulse?" Cole barked. A nurse pressed 2 fingers to Ethan's neck, shaking her head. "Nothing," she whispered, then froze. Wait, I think..." The monitor flickered to life. A faint blip. Then another, irregular. Weak. But there. The room erupted into chaos. Calls for the crash cart, the stretcher, oxygen. A body that had lain still and cold now twitched, convulsed, struggled. Cole pressed his palm to Ethan's chest, feeling the faint flutter of life beneath. He stared, eyes wide, voice breaking. "He's alive," he whispered. "He's actually alive." And in that instant, every certainty he'd built his career on, every rule, every definition of death, shattered beneath the weight of the impossible. The moment they realized Ethan Ward was breathing, the morgue transformed from a place of stillness into a storm of movement. Orderlies burst through the door, pushing a gurney as Dr. Matthew Cole and his team scrambled to stabilize the man who, minutes ago, had been their patient of the dead. The metallic clang of instruments against the floor mingled with the rising voices of disbelief. The very air felt charged, as if the laws of nature had been momentarily suspended. "Get a pulse ox on him," Cole shouted, his voice hoarse. "And get the ICU on standby, now." Ethan's chest rose and fell in weak, stuttering motions, each breath more fragile than the last. His skin was icy, his color gray, his veins collapsed from hours without circulation. Every monitor they connected sputtered uncertainly, as if the machines themselves doubted what they were recording. They wheeled him out of the autopsy suite. The white sheet that had once shrouded him now tangled around his legs. As the elevator doors closed, Dr. Cole caught his reflection in the mirrored surface. Wide eyes, gloved hands streaked with sweat and disbelief. Behind him, the morgue light flickered as though refusing to let go. In the ICU, chaos met reverence. Nurses and physicians who had seen every conceivable emergency stood frozen as the gurney arrived. They exchanged looks of astonishment that words couldn't reach. "This is impossible," one of them whispered. "He was declared hours ago." They connected Ethan to ventilators and monitors, began warming procedures, pushed fluids and oxygen, trying to coax his body fully back to life. The faint heartbeat on the screen, erratic and fragile, was their anchor. No one dared to look away. A nurse named Emily Parker, one of the first to touch Ethan's wrist, later recalled he had no pulse, no respiration, nothing. Then suddenly, he was there, breathing, like something had called him back. In the days that followed, as Ethan remained unconscious but stable, Dr. Cole found himself unable to escape the question that hung in every whispered conversation. Now, medical science offered one possible answer: Lazarus syndrome. Known formally as auto-resuscitation after failed cardiopulmonary resuscitation, it's one of the rarest events in modern medicine. Spontaneous return of circulation after all efforts have ceased. It's believed that residual air pressure or delayed drug effects can sometimes restart the heart minutes after CPR ends. Minutes, not hours. Cole stood by Ethan's bedside, staring at the monitor's rhythmic beeping. "Even Lazarus syndrome can't explain what I saw," he murmured. He was cold. His body had no electrical activity. He wasn't just gone. He was gone. That night, long after the ICU had quieted, Cole sat alone in the hospital corridor. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the tile floor reflecting the dim shapes of passing nurses. He thought about all the deaths he'd witnessed, all the endings that had been so final, so certain. But now, staring into the half-lit room where Ethan Ward lay suspended between worlds, he felt something unfamiliar. Not fear, not even wonder, but the haunting realization that perhaps the boundary between life and death wasn't a line at all, but a door. 3 days after his impossible revival, Ethan Ward opened his eyes. The ICU had become almost sacred ground by then. Doctors spoke in hushed tones, nurses lingered longer than their shifts allowed, and Dr. Matthew Cole visited more often than protocol required. The man on the bed was no longer just a patient. He was a living contradiction, a question wrapped in flesh and heartbeat. It happened just after dawn. The first light of morning slipped through the blinds, painting the machines in thin lines of gold. A nurse was checking his vitals when his hand twitched. Slow, uncertain, but deliberate. His eyelids fluttered. She leaned in, thinking it was another reflex. But then, with the softest rasp of breath, Ethan whispered, "Why, am I here?" The nurse froze. For a heartbeat, the world held still. Then she called for help, her voice cracking with disbelief. By the time Dr. Cole arrived, Ethan's eyes were open, confused, searching. "Alive." "Ethan," Cole said softly, stepping to his side. "You're in the hospital. You were in an accident." Ethan blinked, trying to piece together fragments of memory. "Accident?" His voice was hoarse, every word scraping against exhaustion. "I remember the rain. The lights, then nothing." He looked at Cole, the confusion deepening. "I shouldn't be here, should I?" For a long moment, no one spoke. The rhythmic hum of machines filled the space where answers should have been. In the days that followed, as Ethan regained strength, his memories returned in fragments. Flashes that made little sense, yet carried the weight of something profound. It wasn't dark, he told Cole during one of their quiet conversations. "I thought death would be nothingness. But it wasn't. There was light, not blinding, just warm. I heard voices, familiar but far away. And then I was watching from above. I could see them working on me." "I could see you," Cole listened, torn between professional detachment and something far more human. Awe. He wanted to dismiss it as hallucination, the brain's last flicker of activity before shutting down. Yet Ethan described details no unconscious man could have known. The exact words the doctor had spoken, the placement of instruments, even the faint crack in the fluorescent light above the autopsy table. He shouldn't have remembered any of it. "I've seen near-death experiences before," Cole said later. Patients who claimed they saw light, heard voices. But Ethan, he was clinically dead. No pulse, no brain activity for hours. No one survives that. No one. Ethan often sat in silence, staring out the hospital window at the gray November sky. When asked how he felt, he'd smile faintly and say, "Alive, I guess, but not the same." Dr. Cole understood. The hospital called it a miracle. The media, when they eventually learned, called it resurrection. But to Cole, it was something else entirely. An unanswered question wearing the face of a man who had crossed a threshold and returned. He couldn't shake the feeling that medicine, with all its precision and logic, had only grazed the surface of what truly lay between life and death. And now, the man who had defied both sat before him, breathing proof that some mysteries refused to stay buried. In the weeks that followed Ethan's awakening, Dr. Matthew Cole found himself haunted, not by the image of the body that moved, but by the silence that followed it. Every logical part of him screamed for an explanation. Medicine demanded order, evidence, causality. Yet what had happened in that autopsy room refused to fit inside any known framework. He began to investigate quietly, almost obsessively. Late at night, long after the hospital halls had emptied, he would sit in his office surrounded by stacks of reports and autopsy logs. He replayed security footage, scrutinizing every frame. The moment Ethan's chest moved, the faint flicker of life that returned to the monitors. No equipment failure, no skipped data. The readings were authentic. Cole reached out to colleagues across the country, specialists in neurology, resuscitation, and forensic pathology. He asked the same question, phrased a dozen ways. Can someone be dead for hours, then live again? The answers came back polite, skeptical, but consistent. It's physiologically impossible, one said. Another wrote, if the body was cold for that long, cellular death would be irreversible. Still, he pressed on. He interviewed the paramedics who had worked on Ethan at the crash site. They swore by the accuracy of their readings. The attending physician who declared time of death reviewed his notes twice, confirming every step. There was no error, no oversight. Ethan Ward had, by every measurable standard, been dead. Cole explored alternative explanations, rare metabolic reactions, undetected hypothermia, the so-called protective effect of cold temperatures slowing cellular decay. He even examined whether residual drugs from emergency resuscitation might have delayed some hidden spark of cardiac activity. Each theory made sense in fragments, but none could bridge the impossible gap between clinical death and Ethan's return to life. The deeper Cole searched, the more the case seemed to stare back at him, demanding something beyond science. He began to question not just the event, but the very definitions that shaped his world. We call it the moment of death, he recorded in his journal one night, his voice low and uncertain. But maybe death isn't a moment at all. Maybe it's a process. And sometimes it doesn't finish. Ethan's story spread through the hospital like a quiet fire. Some staff whispered the word miracle with reverence. Others spoke of medical error, unwilling to admit the unknown. But Cole avoided the noise. His concern wasn't reputation. It was understanding. He would later describe walking the halls at midnight, passing the flickering lights and empty gurneys, hearing only the echo of his own footsteps. The longer I looked for an answer, he said, the more I realized how little we truly understand about the boundary between life and death. And though the mystery remained unsolved, one truth pressed against the edges of his mind like a pulse, steady, undeniable, and alive. Months passed. The winter snows had melted, giving way to the faint bloom of spring. For most at the hospital, the memory of Ethan Ward's impossible return had begun to fade, reduced to a whispered story exchanged in break rooms and quiet corridors. But for Dr. Matthew Cole, it never left. It lived in the periphery of his thoughts. That sound, that gasp in the morgue, the pulse that defied every rule he'd ever known. Then, one morning, he received a message. Ethan Ward would like to see you. Cole hesitated before entering the room. Ethan was sitting by the window, sunlight tracing the faint scars along his arms. He looked healthier now, stronger. Yet there was something distant in his eyes, as though part of him still lingered somewhere far beyond the hospital walls. When he saw Cole, he smiled. You probably never thought you'd see me again, he said, his voice quiet but steady. Cole returned the smile, though it faltered slightly. Not under these circumstances, he admitted. You changed how I see everything. They talked for hours. Not about medicine, not about the accident, but about the spaces in between. Ethan spoke of his daughter's laughter, of the taste of coffee he thought he'd never have again, and then, hesitantly, he spoke of there. I don't know what it was, Ethan said, his gaze drifting toward the light. But it wasn't nothing. It was peace. I could see and hear, but not the way we do here. It felt like being everywhere at once. Like being known? He paused, his hands trembling slightly. And then I heard a voice. It wasn't telling me to stay, but it wasn't letting me go either. Next thing I knew, I was back, in the cold, gasping. Cole listened, saying nothing. For once, he wasn't a scientist or a doctor, just a witness to something beyond comprehension. Do you wish you hadn't come back? He asked quietly. Ethan smiled faintly. No, but I think part of me never really left. As the visit ended, Ethan stood and extended his hand. Thank you, he said, for not giving up. Cole shook it, feeling the warmth of life. Fragile, precious, undeniable. You gave me more than you know, he replied. In my work, I see endings every day. But that night, I saw a beginning where there shouldn't have been one. Later that evening, Cole returned to the morgue. The lights hummed softly, the metal tables gleamed, and the air carried that familiar chill. He paused where Ethan's body had once lain, running his hand along the cold surface. Medicine gave me logic, he whispered into the quiet. But this case gave me wonder. As the lights dimmed one by one, the room fell back into silence. the same silence that had once been broken by a single, impossible breath. And somewhere in that stillness, the question remained, what if death is not an end, but merely a pause, waiting for the body to wake once more?